Bleed slow and let your brothers watch you die. The enemy commander screamed those words into a wounded SEAL's stolen radio, then smashed it against the rocks so the trapped Americans could hear it shatter. He had sealed both ends of Raven's Edge Canyon. He had stacked missiles on every ridge. He laughed down at the 11 operators pinned below him, counting their last bullets, and he told his gunners to kill anything that came to save them. No aircraft in the American arsenal could survive what he had built. But 100 miles away, the one pilot they had grounded was already climbing into her cockpit. If this story grips you the way it gripped the men who lived it, subscribe now. Stay to the very end and drop the city you're watching from in the comments, because I love seeing how far this story travels. Captain Emily Carter had learned that the worst sound in the world was not gunfire, and it was not the scream of a failing engine. The worst sound was silence. The silence of a phone that never rings. The silence of a hangar you are no longer allowed to enter. The silence of a career that has been set down gently in a drawer somewhere and forgotten. For 6 weeks, she had lived inside that silence. She sat in a small office on the edge of the base, a room they gave to officers who were no longer useful, but had not yet been discarded. There was a desk that was not hers, a chair that did not fit, and a window that looked out over the flight line where other pilots did the job she had trained her whole life to do. Every morning, she watched the aircraft take off. Every morning, she felt the vibration of the engines in her chest, like a heartbeat that belonged to someone else now. Her name was still stenciled on a locker somewhere. Her flight suit still hung in her quarters, pressed and ready, as if the fabric itself refused to believe what the paperwork had decided. But the truth was simple, and it was cruel. Emily Carter had been pulled from flight status. She was under review. And the men in the comfortable rooms who decided such things had used a word about her that clung to her skin like smoke. Reckless. She hated that word more than she had ever hated anything. "You keep staring at that flight line like it's going to change its mind," a voice said from the doorway. Emily did not turn around right away. She knew the voice. Master Sergeant Ray Dawson had been her crew chief for 4 years, and in that time he had become the closest thing she had to family on that base. He was older than her by 15 years, built like a man who had spent his whole life lifting heavy things, and he had a way of saying difficult truths so plainly that they didn't feel like insults. "It's not going to change its mind, Ray," she said. "The flight line doesn't have a mind. The people do, and the people already decided." Dawson stepped into the small office and set a paper cup of coffee on the corner of the desk. "People change their minds every day," he said, "especially when they run out of other options. That's not comfort. That's just math." Never said it was comfort. He sat down across from her, the chair groaning under his weight. "Captain, I've been fixing aircraft for 22 years. I've seen good pilots washed out for nothing. I've seen bad pilots promoted for looking calm in a briefing. And I've seen exactly one pilot in my whole career fly the way you flew over Raven's Edge." Emily finally looked at him. "And how did I fly, Ray? Because I've heard a lot of words for it lately. Reckless, insubordinate, dangerous." "You flew like the men on the ground were worth more than the airframe," Dawson said. "That's it. That's the whole crime they charged you with." The words landed harder than she expected. She looked back out the window so he wouldn't see her face. 3 years ago, Raven's Edge Canyon had nearly killed her. A patrol had been pinned in a narrow stretch of that canyon, surrounded, taking fire from 3 directions, and the weather had turned so bad that command had called off the air support. Every rule, every regulation, every voice in her headset had told her the same thing. Pull out. Come home. The soldiers were beyond saving. She had not pulled out. She had dropped Thunderbolt 3 so low into that canyon that afterward the maintenance crew found scrape marks on the belly of the aircraft where it had kissed the top of a ridge. She had flown through weather that should have blinded her, threaded a valley narrower than her wingspan felt like it should allow, and she had put the A-10's cannon exactly where it needed to be again and again until the men on the ground could move. Every one of those soldiers came home, and Emily Carter came home to an investigation. "You know what the worst part was?" she said quietly. "It wasn't the review board. It wasn't the questions. It was one of them, this colonel from a wing I'd never even served in. He leaned across the table and he said, 'Captain, do you understand that you got lucky?' Like it was luck, like I closed my eyes and prayed and hoped the mountain would move for me. I didn't get lucky, Ray. I flew that canyon. I earned every foot of it." Dawson nodded slowly. "I know. They don't. Some of them do. They're just scared of saying it out loud because if they admit you were right, they have to admit the rulebook was wrong. And a man who built his whole career on the rulebook, he'd rather bury a good pilot than crack the spine of his own Bible. Emily let out a breath that was almost a laugh. When did you get so philosophical? 22 years under aircraft captain. You do a lot of thinking on your back. For a moment, the office was quiet again, but it was a different silence now, a shared one. Then Dawson leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and his voice dropped into something more serious. There's chatter on the line, he said. You didn't hear it from me. Emily's spine straightened. She knew that tone. Every pilot did. It was the tone that came before everything changed. What kind of chatter? The bad kind. SEAL element went into a valley op 2 days ago. Extraction mission supposed to be quick. It went sideways. Word is they're pinned. Bad. Command's been running rescue birds at it since yesterday, and every one of them got pushed back. The coffee in Emily's hand had gone cold, and she hadn't noticed. Pushed back how? Missile systems on the high ground. Machine gun nests in the rocks. Somebody set this up like they knew our playbook page by page. Dawson looked at her, and there was something careful in his eyes, like a man handing over a live grenade. Captain, the valley they're pinned in. She already knew. Something cold and certain had settled in her stomach before he even said it. It's Raven's Edge, she said. Dawson nodded once. It's Raven's Edge. Emily stood up so fast the chair scraped hard against the floor. She walked to the window, but she wasn't looking at the flight line anymore. She was looking at something 3 years and 1,000 miles away, a valley she had promised herself she would never fly into again. How many? She asked. 11, SEAL Team Element, call sign Viper 8. One of them's got a bad leg, took shrapnel or a round through the thigh. Another one's losing blood, they can't tell how much. And they're rationing ammunition. Dawson's jaw tightened. They're counting bullets, Captain. You know what it means when men start counting bullets. She knew exactly what it meant. It meant they had stopped planning for the fight and started planning for the last stand. It meant somewhere in that canyon, 11 of the best trained men America had were quietly deciding how many rounds to keep in reserve. For a moment, they didn't want to say out loud. Where are they now? She said. Command. Where's the decision sitting? That's the thing. Dawson stood too. There is no decision. That's the whole problem. Every option they run, the answer comes back the same. No aircraft survives that canyon. The geometry's wrong, the threats are stacked. The ceiling's too low for standoff weapons, and the walls are too tight for anything to maneuver. The staff's been in that command center for 18 hours, and all they've got is a list of ways to die. Emily turned around. Take me there. Dawson didn't move. Captain, you're not on flight status. You're not even supposed to be near an aircraft. You walk into that command center, you're walking into a review board's dream. They'll hang everything you've got left on the wall. Ray, her voice was steady in a way that surprised even her. There are 11 men counting bullets in a canyon that I know better than any living pilot. You want me to sit in this office and watch the flight line while they die 1 round at a time? Dawson looked at her for a long moment. Then something in his face changed, some old loyalty rising up through all the caution. He picked up her flight suit jacket from where it hung on the back of the door, the one with the captain's bars and the squadron patch, and he held it out to her. I already had it pressed, he said. Figured today was the day. She took it. The command center was a wall of noise and blue light, and too many people breathing the same recycled air. When Emily walked in behind Dawson, several heads turned, and she saw the exact moment recognition crossed their faces. She saw the flinch. The grounded pilot, the one from the review. The problem they thought they'd shelved. Colonel Richard Hayes stood at the center of it all in front of a map that everyone in the room kept glancing at and then away from the way you look at a wound you can't fix. He was a big man with gray at his temples and the kind of tired that goes deeper than sleep. When he saw Emily, he did not look surprised. He looked, if anything, like a man who had been expecting her and had dreaded it in equal measure. Captain Carter, he said, you're not supposed to be here. No, sir, I'm not. You understand that your presence in this room, given your current status, is a problem I'm going to have to answer for later. I understand, sir. Hayes held her gaze for a second longer than he needed to. Then he made a small gesture, a tilt of the head toward the map, and the meaning was clear. He wasn't going to throw her out. Not yet. Not while 11 men were counting bullets. Emily stepped up to the map, and there it was, Raven's Edge. She would have known the shape of that canyon in the dark blindfolded from the feel of the air over the ridgelines. Someone had marked it with red symbols, threat rings, and hostile positions, and as her eyes moved across them, she felt her stomach drop because whoever had built this trap had built it well. "Walk me through it," she said, and then catching herself, "Sir, please." A young intelligence officer, named Lieutenant Park, stepped up beside her. He was pale and he hadn't slept, and his voice had the flat, over-controlled tone of a man holding himself together with willpower. "Viper 8 inserted here at the eastern mouth 36 hours ago," Park said, pointing. "Standard extraction, a compromised asset they were pulling out. The intel was clean, too clean. We think it was fed to us. They walked in, and the moment they were deep enough that turning around meant crossing open ground, the enemy sealed the eastern end, here, and the western end here." "Corked the bottle," Emily said. "Yes, ma'am, both ends. And then they took the high ground." Park's finger moved to a series of red marks along the ridgelines. "Man-portable air defense systems here, and here. At least 3, maybe 4. Heavy machine guns in the rocks along the northern wall dug in interlocking fields of fire. Every time we send a rescue bird toward either mouth of the canyon, they light up the sky before it can get close enough to matter. We've sent 4 aircraft. 4 got pushed back. 1 took damage and barely made it home." Emily studied the marks. The threat rings overlapped like ripples in a pond, and in the center of all of them, in the narrowest, deepest part of the canyon, was a small blue symbol. 11 men. She stared at that symbol, and something in her chest went very tight and very quiet. "What's the ground situation?" she asked. "Deteriorating," Park said. "We've had intermittent comms. Their team leader is a senior chief named Wade Coleman. Last transmission about 90 minutes ago, he reported 1 urgent casualty, 1 serious and reduced ammunition. He also reported that the enemy is not assaulting." Emily's head turned sharply. "Not assaulting." "No, ma'am, they're just holding the walls, waiting." And that Emily understood was the cruelest thing of all. The enemy commander wasn't trying to overrun them. He didn't need to. He had studied American rescue doctrine. He had built a trap that made rescue impossible, and now he was simply going to wait. Wait for the blood loss. Wait for the ammunition to run dry. Wait for the desert night, and then the desert day, and then the desert night again. He was going to let time do his killing because time cost him nothing, and it cost the men in that canyon everything. "He's patient," she said quietly. "Ma'am, the enemy commander, he's not in a hurry. He knows we can't come, so he's just going to sit up there and watch them die slow." She looked at Hayes. "Sir, that's not a tactic. That's an execution with extra steps." Hayes said nothing, but something moved behind his eyes. A staff officer at a nearby console, a major named Ellis, who Emily didn't know, spoke up without turning around. "Colonel, I have to say it again. We've run every profile. Fast movers can't get low enough to affect the ground fight without flying straight into the manpad's envelope. Rotary wing can't survive the machine gun corridor. Standoff munitions can't be employed because the walls amass the targets, and we can't put ordnance that close to friendlies with the geometry we've got. I understand it's hard to hear, but the honest answer is that there is no aircraft in our inventory that survives entry into that canyon." The room went quiet, and into that quiet, Master Sergeant Ray Dawson, who had no business speaking in a command center, who could be reprimanded just for opening his mouth, said the words that changed everything. "There's one that could." Every head in the room turned. Dawson didn't flinch. He looked straight at Colonel Hayes. "The A-10, sir. It's the only airframe built to live down in the dirt like that. It's armored for exactly this. It's slow enough to fly the canyon and mean enough to survive it. And there's exactly 1 pilot on this base who's already flown Raven's Edge and come home." Nobody said her name. They didn't have to. Every eye in the room slid toward Emily Carter. Major Ellis turned from his console, and his face was tight with the particular anger of a man who has already decided something and does not want to be argued with. "Sergeant, with respect, you're a crew chief, and Captain Carter is grounded pending review precisely because the last time she flew that canyon, she nearly destroyed an aircraft and violated a dozen safety parameters. We are not going to solve this problem by repeating the mistake that got her grounded in the first place." "The mistake that brought a whole patrol home," Dawson said. The mistake that could have killed her and lost us a $15 million aircraft. Ellis shot back. Luck is not a strategy, Sergeant. It wasn't luck, Emily said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Something in the flatness of it made the room turn toward her. Major, you weren't there, she said. So let me tell you what actually happened 3 years ago, since it seems to be the reason nobody in this room can look at me straight. I didn't get lucky. I flew that canyon. I studied it for 11 days before that mission because it was in our patrol sector and I had a bad feeling about it. I knew where the walls pinched. I knew where the thermals came up off the rock in the afternoon and where they died at dusk. I knew the one stretch where you could get a cannon down onto the canyon floor without flying into the far wall because I had run it 100 times in my head. When that patrol got pinned, I didn't close my eyes and pray. I flew a route I had already flown 100 times in my mind. That's not luck, Major. That's the opposite of luck. That's the only thing that's ever kept anybody alive down there. Ellis opened his mouth. And here's what you don't know, Emily continued, stepping toward the map. That canyon has a personality. It has moods. The wind funnels through the eastern mouth and slams into the north wall about 2/3 of the way in right here, and it creates a rotor, a rolling column of air that'll flip an unprepared aircraft into the rocks. Every one of those rescue birds that got pushed back, I'd bet my life they got shoved toward the wall before they ever even got shot at, and they didn't know why. So they pulled off, and the crews came home thinking the missiles beat them. The missiles didn't beat them. The canyon beat them because they didn't know it. I do. The silence in the room had changed texture. It wasn't dismissive anymore. It was listening. Lieutenant Park, the intelligence officer, spoke quietly. Ma'am, that actually correlates with the flight data from the second rescue attempt. The pilot reported an uncommanded roll before he ever detected a launch. We logged it as pilot error. It wasn't pilot error, Emily said. It was the canyon. Colonel Hayes had not spoken in several minutes. He stood with his arms crossed, his eyes moving between Emily and the map, and Emily could see the war going on behind his face. He was a man responsible for everyone in this room, and for 11 men in a canyon, and for a grounded captain, he was not supposed to let anywhere near an aircraft. He was a man who could end his own career by making the wrong choice in the next 60 seconds. Captain, Hayes said finally, if I send you into that canyon and you die, I have killed a pilot. I was ordered to keep on the ground. If I send you in and you live and it works, I have still violated the terms of your review and every safety directive attached to it. There is no version of this where I come out clean. You understand that? Yes, sir. And you understand that I am not asking whether you're willing. Of course you're willing. You've been willing since the moment you walked in here. I'm asking whether you're right because I can survive being second-guessed. I cannot survive sending a pilot to a death I knew was coming. Emily walked to the map. She placed one finger on the eastern mouth of the canyon, and she began to move it slowly along a path only she could see, weaving between the red threat rings, dipping low, staying under using the walls the enemy thought protected them. Here's how it dies for them, sir, she said. Not for me, for them. The enemy set this trap assuming any aircraft comes in high enough to be seen and slow enough to be tracked. They stack their missiles for altitude, their machine guns for the approaches. They built the whole thing around the idea that we fly the way the book tells us to fly. So I don't fly the book. I come in from the east right down on the deck below the ridge line using the north wall to mask my approach until the last possible second. The rotor that flipped those other birds, I know it's coming, so I let it push me. I ride it instead of fighting it, and it slings me right into the one part of the canyon where I can bring the cannon to bear on the machine gun corridor. I take the guns first because the guns are what's keeping the extraction birds out. Then I work the man pads positions one at a time, and every pass I make it from a direction they didn't build for. The armor, Hayes asked. The A-10 was designed to take hits and keep flying. Titanium bathtub around the cockpit, redundant systems, manual reversion on the flight controls if the hydraulics go. I'm not saying I don't get hit, sir. Down that low, that close, I'm going to get hit. I'm saying this is the one aircraft in the inventory that can get hit and keep working. That's not luck. That's the whole reason the thing exists. Hayes stared at the map for a long moment. Major Ellis tried one more time, but his voice had lost its certainty. Cornell, even if everything she says is true, we're talking about a single aircraft against a prepared, layered defense. flown by a pilot who's been grounded for 6 weeks and hasn't flown a combat profile in 43 days, Emily said. I've been counting. And Major, in those 43 days, I have flown that canyon in my head every single night because it's the last thing I did that mattered, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I know it better now than I did 3 years ago. If anything, being grounded made me more dangerous, not less. A voice came over the command center speakers, then crackling, distorted fighting through jamming and distance. The whole room went still. Any station? Any station? This is Viper 8, actual. How copy over? Lieutenant Park lunged for the console. Viper 8, this is command. We read you, go ahead. There was a burst of static, and then a man's voice, low calm in the way only truly exhausted men are calm, came through the room, and it was the calm that made it unbearable. Command Viper 8, be advised we have 2 urgent surgical casualties now. Repeat, 2 urgent. Ammunition status is critical. We are consolidating to a defensive position and we will hold in as long as we are able. A pause. Static, then quieter, almost gentle. Command, I need you to be straight with me. Is anybody coming? My men are asking, and I told them I'd give them the truth. The whole room looked at Colonel Hayes, and Colonel Hayes looked at Captain Emily Carter. Emily didn't wait for a permission. She stepped to the console, and Park, after a half-second glance at Hayes and the smallest of nods, handed her the transmitter. Viper 8, this is Storm Glass, Emily said. There was a pause on the other end, a long one. And when Wade Coleman's voice came back, something had changed in it. Some of the exhaustion had cracked, and underneath it was something raw. Say again your call sign. You heard me right, Senior Chief. Storm Glass, same pilot who flew your sector 3 years back. Another pause. Then, and this was the thing that broke something open in the whole command center, they heard faintly over the open line other voices in the background. Men. A ragged sound that took a moment to recognize as something between a laugh and a cheer, the sound of desperate men hearing the one name that meant maybe. Storm Glass, Coleman said, and now his voice was thick. The boys down here have heard of you. There's a story that goes around about a pilot who flew a canyon nobody should have flown and brought a whole patrol home. We always figured it was a legend, something guys tell to keep their nerve up. It's not a legend, Senior Chief. No, Coleman said softly. I don't guess it is. Emily held the transmitter and she looked at the blue symbol on the map. 11 men in the deepest part of a canyon she had sworn never to fly again, and she felt the last of her doubt burn away. Viper 8, listen to me, she said. I need you to do exactly 3 things, and I need you to do them in the next hour, because that's about how long it's going to take me to get to you. Are you tracking? Send it. 1, you keep every man you've got behind cover, because when I come in, it's going to get loud and it's going to get ugly, and I do not want anybody exposed. 2, when I clear the machine gun corridor, and I will clear it, you get your casualties staged at the extraction point because the birds are going to have a very small window and I intend to make it 4 of them. 3, Emily's voice dropped. You hold on, Senior Chief. You've held this long, you hold a little longer. Because I am coming and I have never once left men in that canyon and I am not about to start with yours. Do you copy? You. The line was silent for a moment. Then Wade Coleman's voice came back and it was steady now, steadier than it had been the whole call. Because sometimes all a man needs to find his strength is one other person willing to spend theirs. Stormglass Viper 8 copies all. We'll hold. You just get here. A beat. And ma'am, whatever they did to you back home, whatever it is that's got them calling you a problem instead of a pilot. The 11 of us down here, we don't care what your paperwork says. We only care that you're coming. Viper 8 out. The line went dead. For a moment, nobody in the command center moved. Then Colonel Hayes turned to Emily, and the war behind his face was over. She could see what it had cost him, and she could see that he had paid it. Captain Carter, he said, you are hereby returned to flight status under my authority as commander of this operation. Every consequence that comes from that decision is mine and mine alone, and I want that in the record right now. Lieutenant Park, log it verbatim. Captain Carter did not ask for reinstatement. I ordered it, because in my judgment, as the officer responsible for the lives of 11 Americans, she represents their only chance of survival, and I will not let a review board's paperwork kill men I have the power to save. Log, sir, Park said, and his voice cracked a little as he said it. Major Ellis stepped forward. Emily braced for one more argument. But Ellis wasn't looking at her with anger anymore. He was looking at her with something closer to shame, and when he spoke, it was quiet. Captain, I logged that second rescue attempt as pilot error. That was my call. If that pilot had known about the rotor, about the wind on the north wall, he might have pressed the attack. He might have gotten a look at those machine gun positions we've been guessing about for 2 days. Ellis swallowed. I owe that pilot an apology I can't give him because he's already home and I'm not going to reopen it and shame him. But I owe you the truth. I was wrong about the canyon, and I think I was wrong about you. Whatever I can do from this console to get you in and out of there alive, it's yours. Just tell me what you need. Emily looked at him, this man who had fought her every step, and she understood that his fight had never really been about her. It had been about a raw book he trusted more than his own eyes, and it had taken 11 trapped men and a voice on a radio to break that trust open. She didn't have time for grudges. Nobody trapped in a canyon was helped by a grudge. I need everything you've got on those man-pads positions, she said. Every launch you logged, every azimuth, every timestamp. I need to know where they think I'm coming from so I can come from somewhere else. And I need the exact position of every man in Viper 8 updated the second Coleman gives it to you. Because when I put the cannon down in that canyon, I am going to be threading rounds between men who are close enough to feel the heat. There's zero margin, so you be my second set of eyes, Major. You keep me clean on the friendly picture. Can you do that? I can do that, Ellis said. And for the first time, he almost smiled. Go get them, Captain. Emily turned toward the door. Ray Dawson was already there, and he already had her helmet in his hands, and his weathered face had an expression on it she had not seen in 6 weeks. Not pity, not caution, pride. She's fueled and armed, he said, handing her the helmet. Thunderbolt 3, full cannon load, full complement. I checked every station myself. She's ready, Captain. She's been ready the whole time, been waiting on you same as you've been waiting on her. Emily took the helmet. Her hands were steady. She had expected them to shake the way they had shaken in that office window, watching a flight line she wasn't allowed to walk onto, but they were steady now because a person's hands only shake when they don't know what to do, and Emily Carter knew exactly what she had to do. Ray, she said, if this goes bad, it's not going to go bad. If it does, you tell them the truth, not the paperwork version, the real one. You tell them I knew the risk and I flew it anyway, and I flew it because there were people down there who couldn't leave. That's it. That's the whole story. Same as 3 years ago. Same as it'll always be. Dawson's jaw worked for a second before he could answer. I'll tell them, he said, but you're going to tell them yourself. Because you're coming home. You always come home. That's the other half of the legend those boys are down there telling each other. The pilot who flies the canyon, nobody can fly, and then walks away from it. You don't get to break the second half. Emily almost laughed. She gripped his shoulder once hard and he gripped hers back, and neither of them said anything else because there was nothing else to say. She walked out onto the flight line. The same flight line she had watched through a window for 43 days. The same tarmac she had been forbidden to touch. And there at the end of it sat Thunderbolt. 3 low and ugly and beautiful, the only aircraft in the world built to live in the dirt and take a beating and keep flying the machine. Everyone else called dangerous, waiting for the pilot. Everyone else called reckless. Behind her in the command center, Colonel Hayes stood in front of the map and stared at the blue symbol and the red rings closing around it, and he said mostly to himself, 11 went in. He didn't finish the sentence. He couldn't, not yet. But everyone in the room heard the shape of the promise he was making to that map. 11 went in, and by God, if he had anything to say about it, and if the grounded captain now climbing into her aircraft was even half of what she claimed to be 11, were going to come out. Emily climbed the ladder. She settled into the cockpit, and it fit her the way nothing had fit her in 6 weeks, the way your own bed fits after too long away. She ran her hands over the controls she had touched 10,000 times. She pulled the straps tight across her chest, and she looked out through the canopy at a sky that had gone the deep bruised color of coming night, the color of the exact hour when 3 years ago she had learned that the thermals died over the rock, and the wind laid down, and the canyon for one narrow window became a place a pilot could survive. The same hour was coming now. The engines woke under her hands, first one and then the other, a low-building thunder that she felt in her teeth and her spine and the deepest part of her chest. Thunderbolt 3 came alive around her, and every warning light, Every gauge, every system reported, ready, ready, ready. On the radio, she heard Coleman's last words to her again, replaying in her mind. We don't care what your paperwork says. We only care that you're coming. I'm coming, she said to no one, to all of them, to 11 men in a canyon, and a colonel who had bet his career on her, and a crew chief who refused to let her break the second half of the legend. I'm coming. She pushed the throttles forward. Thunderbolt 3 rolled down the flight lines she had watched for 43 days, gathered speed and lifted off into the darkening sky, turning east toward the mouth of the canyon that had taken so much from her. Once the canyon the enemy had turned into a perfect trap, the canyon, where 11 of the best men America had, were counting their last bullets and holding on to a single word that a woman they'd never met had given them. Coming. Far ahead, still hidden below the horizon, Raven's Edge waited in the dark. And on a ridge above 11 trapped men, an enemy commander who had thought of everything, who had studied the American playbook page by page, who had built a machine of patience and blood and geometry, lifted his eyes to the eastern sky. At the low sound of an engine he did not recognize, and did not expect an ugly, guttural, unfamiliar growl coming in far lower than anything had any right to fly. For the first time since he had sealed the canyon, something crossed his face that had not been there before. It was doubt. Thunderbolt 3 climbed into the dark, and for the first 90 seconds, Emily Carter said nothing at all. She just flew. She let her hands remember the aircraft, let the engines settle into their rhythm, let 43 days of silence burn off her like fog off a runway. Then she keyed the radio. Command Stormglass's airborne wheels up on profile. Give me a time to the canyon. Ellis's voice came back fast and clean. Stormglass Command copies airborne. Direct route puts you at the eastern mouth in 51 minutes. But Captain B advised direct route takes you across the northern approach, and that's exactly the corridor those manpads are hunting. They'll paint you before you're even in gun range of the canyon. Then I'm not taking the direct route. Say your intentions. Emily was already banking, already pulling the aircraft south of the line Ellis had drawn on his screen, already flying the map that lived in her head instead of the one on the wall. I'm going around, south then east, then I drop into the low ground behind the ridge and come up the canyon from the eastern mouth right on the deck. It adds 11 minutes, but it means the first time they see me is the last second before I'm on top of them. Log it. 51 becomes 62. Their clock, not mine. There was a pause on the line, and then Ellis said quieter, copy that Stormglass, 62 minutes. And then softer still, almost to himself, but forgetting the mic was hot. 11 minutes we're buying with those men's blood. He caught himself. Disregard that last. I'm sorry, Captain. Don't be. Emily's voice was flat and even. You said the true thing. Every minute I add is a minute those two casualties keep bleeding. I know the math, Major. I've been doing the math since the second I saw the map. But a fast approach that gets me shot down before I fire a single round costs them everything. A slow approach that gets me into the canyon alive costs them 11 minutes, so we spend the 11 minutes. Now stop apologizing and get me those launch logs. Sending them to your data link now. The number started scrolling across her display. Every missile launch the command center had logged over 2 days of failed rescues, every azimuth, every timestamp, every position where a plume of smoke had climbed off a ridge to chase an American aircraft back over the horizon. Emily read them the way another person reads a letter from someone they love, hungry fast, absorbing every detail. And a picture started to form. Command Stormglass, I'm seeing something in these launch logs. Tell me if I'm reading it right. She traced the pattern with her eyes. Every launch, every single one came off the northern ridgeline or the western mouth. Nothing off the southern wall. Nothing off the eastern approach. 2 full days of launches and not one of them from the south or the east. Ellis was quiet for a second. Then Park's voice came on the intelligence officer, and it had an edge of realization in it. Stormglass, you're right. We logged the launches by threat ring, not by origin. We never plotted them by wall. Stand by. A pause. Confirmed. 0 launches from the southern or eastern faces. Everything's oriented north and west. Because that's the direction we always come from, Emily said. North and west is where our bases are. North and west is where the doctrine says the rescue birds stage. He built his whole air defense to face the direction he knew we'd come. He never armed the back door, because in his head there is no back door. Nobody flies up the eastern mouth on the deck. It's too tight, too low, too blind. Nobody's crazy enough. Nobody except you, Park said. Nobody except me. Emily banked harder, committing to the long southern arc. That's the whole game, gentlemen. That's why it has to be this aircraft and this pilot and this route. He built a wall against the front door and left the back door wide open because he can't imagine anybody being stupid enough to use it. His imagination is his blind spot, and I'm about to fly straight through it. 58 minutes to the canyon. For a while, there was nothing to do but fly, and Emily hated that because flying with nothing to do meant thinking, and thinking meant the doubt came creeping back in around the edges. She had told Hayes she knew the canyon better now than 3 years ago. She had told Ellis being grounded made her more dangerous. She had believed it when she said it. But up here in the dark, alone, with 11 lives hanging off the end of her decisions, a colder voice started asking colder questions. What if the wind had changed? What if 3 years of erosion had reshaped the walls? What if the rotor came off the north face 100 feet from where she remembered and slung her into the rock before she ever fired a shot? What if the legend those SEALs were telling each other was just that, a legend, a story that had grown in the telling, and the real Emily Carter was exactly the reckless pilot the review board said she was about to prove them right in the most permanent way possible? She keyed the radio mostly to make the voice stop. Dawson, you on the line? A crackle. Right here, Captain. Colonel, let me stay in the room. Somebody's got to translate for these staff pukes when the systems start talking. A beat. You doing okay up there? Ray, tell me something true. Anything. 3 years ago, when I came home from Raven's Edge with the belly scraped and the board convened, you saw the aircraft before anybody cleaned it up. You saw exactly how close I flew. Her voice was quieter now. Was it luck, Ray? Be straight with me. Because I've got 56 minutes to talk myself into believing it wasn't, and if you tell me it was, I'd rather know now. The line was silent long enough that she thought maybe he hadn't heard. Then Dawson's voice came back, and it was rough. Captain, I've pulled dead men out of aircraft that got lucky. Lucky don't look like what you brought home. Lucky is random. What you did had a shape to it. Every scrape on that belly, every impact mark, they all told the same story, and the story was a pilot who knew exactly where every inch of that aircraft was, every second of that flight. I've been under airplanes 22 years. I know the difference between a pilot who survived and a pilot who flew. You flew. A pause. And you want to know how I know for dead certain it wasn't luck. How? Because you're about to do it again on purpose. Nobody chases luck twice, Captain. Cowards don't go back to the canyon that almost killed them. You're going back because some part of you knows you own that place. So quit letting a bunch of men in comfortable chairs rent space in your head. You hear me? You paid for that canyon in full 3 years ago. Go collect. Something in Emily's chest loosened just slightly, just enough. Copy that, Ray. Now get off my radio and go be a legend. And come home so I can say I told you so. 52 minutes to the canyon. The southern arc took her out over empty country, low quiet, the aircraft skimming in the dark, and Emily flew it clean and precise, banking around terrain she couldn't see, but had memorized off the map, trusting the numbers, trusting Dawson, trusting herself. And then 49 minutes out, the radio crackled with a new voice, and it was the one voice she most needed and most dreaded to hear. Stormglass? This is Viper 8, actual, you still coming. Wade Coleman, the SEAL team leader. And his voice was worse than it had been in the command center, thinner, further away, like a man calling from the bottom of a well. Viper 8 Stormglass. I'm coming. I'm 49 minutes out on a route your enemy can't see. How you holding, Senior Chief? We're holding. A cough. But I got to give you an honest picture, ma'am, because you're about to fly into it, and you deserve the truth, same as my men deserve it from me. Coleman's breathing was audible over the line. My urgent casualty, the leg wound, he's stable, but he's fading in and out. My second urgent, the blood loss, my corpsman's got him packed, but he's gray, ma'am. He's real gray. And we're down to, I want to say, 40 rounds total across all 11 of us. 40 rounds. Emily's hands tightened on the controls. 40 rounds, 11 men. That was less than 4 bullets each between them and the end. Senior Chief, listen to me. There's more, Coleman said. And I need you to hear this part because it changes your math. The enemy just moved. Emily went cold. Say again, the enemy moved how? About 20 minutes ago, they started shifting fighters down off the northern ridge into the canyon floor. Not many yet, maybe a squad, but they're coming down off the walls, ma'am. For 2 days, they just sat up top and waited. Now they're moving down toward us. I think, Coleman's voice caught, I think they're done waiting. I think their commander decided he's tired of the slow way. I think they're setting up to assault our position, and if they do with 40 rounds, Stormglass we do not hold. We do not hold. 47 minutes to the canyon, and there it was, the twist that changed everything. The thing Emily had not planned for because her whole approach had been built on time. Come in slow, come in safe. Come in from the back door because the enemy was a patient man, content to let the desert do his killing. But he wasn't patient anymore. Somewhere on that ridge, the man who had laughed into a stolen radio had gotten impatient, and now the slow clock Emily had been counting on had just become a fuse. Command Stormglass, you copy Viper 8's traffic. We copy. Hayes's voice, not Ellis's now. The colonel had taken the mics himself. Captain, the enemy's changing the tempo. Your approach was built on them staying static. What do you need? Emily's mind was already moving fast, cold running the new problem. I need to know how long. Coleman, if they assault when? Best guess. Best guess is... Coleman was quiet for a second. They're still consolidating, getting into position. I'd say 20 minutes before they've got the numbers down here to rush us. Maybe 25. But once they start, ma'am, it's over in 2. 20 minutes, and Emily was 47 minutes out. The math was brutal and simple, and it landed in her gut like a stone. On her current route, the safe route, the smart route, the one that used the back door and the terrain and the enemy's own blind spot, she arrived 25 minutes too late. She arrived to a canyon full of dead seals and a commander standing over their bodies. The slow approach that kept her alive was the slow approach that got them killed. She had a choice to make, and she had about 4 seconds to make it. Command, she said, and her voice was very steady the way it always got when everything else was chaos. I'm coming off the southern route. I'm going direct. The line erupted. Negative, negative, Stormglass. Ellis came back instantly. Direct route takes you straight across the northern Manpad's corridor. That's the armed face. That's the door he built his whole defense against. You go direct, they paint you 30 miles out, and you're flying into 3, maybe 4 missile systems, all oriented exactly where you'll be. Captain, that's not a risk. That's the only route that gets me there before those men die. Major, so it's the route. Emily was already banking, already hauling Thunderbolt 3 out of the long safe arc and pointing its ugly nose straight at the front door of hell. You told me yourself the back door buys me survival and costs them 11 minutes. Well, now the front door costs me survival and buys them everything. So we spend it the other way. I'll take the missiles over their funerals. Log it. Stormglass is going direct. Captain Hayes started, Sir, and now there was something in Emily's voice that stopped even the colonel. You put me back on flight status because I was those men's only chance. I can't be their chance from the wrong side of a 25-minute gap. The whole reason I'm the one in this cockpit is that I can fly things nobody else can fly. So let me fly it. I'll come in across the north face. I'll be low. I'll be fast, and I'll use everything that Canyon gave me 3 years ago to stay alive long enough to matter. But I am not going to fly a safe route to a graveyard. Not again. Not ever again. There was a silence on the line, and then Colonel Hayes said the only thing left to say. Stormglass Command copies direct. Godspeed, Captain. We'll feed you every threat we see the second we see it. Ellis, get her the northern picture. Everybody in this room from this second on, our only job is keeping that pilot alive. Move. 44 minutes to the canyon, new route, new math. And every one of those 44 minutes now ran straight through the teeth of the trap. Coleman, Emily said, new plan. I'm coming direct. That means I'm coming across the north wall, the armed side, and there's going to be a lot of noise up on those ridges before I ever get to you. Missiles, my aircraft maneuvering all of it. Do not let that pull your men out of cover to look. Whatever you hear up top, you keep everybody down and you keep everybody staged for extraction. Because if I get through that north face alive, I'm going to be on top of that squad in your canyon fast, and I need your people clear of my gun line. You copy. Copy all, Stormglass. A pause and then quieter. Ma'am, you're coming across the armed side for us. That's the side that's been swatting our birds down for 2 days. I know exactly what side it is, Senior Chief. Then I got to say it. Thank you. Whatever happens. From all 11 of us. Thank you. Save it, Emily said, and there was almost warmth in it now, almost. Thank me when you're on the bird. Stormglass out. 40 minutes. Emily settled into the direct route and let the aircraft eat the distance, and now the doubt was gone, burned off entirely, because doubt is a luxury of people who still have a choice, and Emily had made her choice. There was nothing left now but the flying. Stormglass, Ellis, new traffic. We've got signals activity is spiking on the North Ridge. They're powering up. Captain, I think they know something's coming. Not from your direction yet, but the whole ridge just went to a higher alert state. Somebody up there got nervous. Coleman said they started moving down into the canyon 20 minutes ago, Emily said. A commander who's confident doesn't move his men. A commander who moves his men is a commander who feels a clock running. He's not patient anymore, Major. Something changed his mind, and a nervous enemy makes mistakes. She paused. Or a nervous enemy gets trigger happy and paints everything that moves. Either way, keep watching that ridge. 36 minutes. And then the second twist in this one came not from the enemy, but from her own aircraft. A light blinked on, amber, then a second one. Emily's eyes flicked to the caution panel and her stomach dropped a half-inch because she knew these lights. She knew what they meant, and she knew the timing could not have been worse. Command Stormglass, I've got a fuel imbalance caution. Left feed, à l'efficient. Reading a slow discrepancy between tanks. She kept her voice level. Might be a sensor, might be a transfer valve, might be nothing. Might be something. Stand by while I work it. Copy Stormglass, we see your telemetry. Dawson's voice cut in sharp, and Emily could hear him leaning over some technician's shoulder. Captain, talk to me. Is it the number 2 feed or the cross feed showing the split? Number 2 feed, left side. It's climbing slow, Ray, point by point. A pause. She could hear Dawson thinking could picture him running the aircraft's guts through his head the way he'd done for 4 years. Okay, listen. That bird flew a full functional check this morning before I ever pulled it to the alert line. That system was green. Green, Captain. So either you took a bird strike I don't know about, which you didn't, or you've got a sensor going soft on you. My money's the sensor. But you watch that number, and if it stops climbing slow and starts climbing fast, you tell me the second it does, because slow is a law and fast is the truth. Copy, Ray. Watching it. 32 minutes. The amber lights sat there on the panel like a pair of eyes, and Emily flew on, splitting her attention between the route and the fuel and the threat picture. And this was the thing nobody in a comfortable review room ever understood, that flying combat wasn't one impossible thing. It was 10 difficult things all happening at once, all demanding your whole mind. And the pilot who lived was the pilot who could hold it all 10 and not drop a single one. Stormglass Viper 8. Coleman again, and his voice had gone tight. Update, the squad on our canyon floor just linked up with a second element. They doubled, maybe 18-20 fighters now, and they're spreading out into an assault line. Ma'am, my window just shrank. This isn't 20 minutes anymore. This is more like 10, maybe less. 10 minutes, and Emily was 32 out. She closed her eyes for one full second, then opened them. Coleman, I can't fold time. I'm coming as fast as this aircraft will go, and I'm still 20-plus minutes behind your 10. So I need you to buy me the difference. Every trick you've got. You hear me? Every dirty, desperate, mean trick a SEAL knows for making a bigger force think twice. Ma'am, with 40 rounds. I'm not talking about rounds, Senior Chief. I'm talking about doubt. Right now, that assault line is confident. They think you're beaten. They think you're down to nothing. And they're right, but they don't know how right they are. So make them wrong in their heads. Make noise. Make them think you've got more than you've got. Make one aggressive move that makes their commander pause and reconsider and pull them back to reset, because every time you make him reset, you buy me 2 minutes. I don't need you to win, Coleman. I need you to be expensive. Can your men be expensive for me? There was a silence. And then Wade Coleman's voice came back, and something had changed in it. Some of the exhaustion had burned away and been replaced by the thing that had made these men SEALs in the first place. Stormglass, We can be expensive. Viper 8's whole reputation is being expensive. A grim edge now. You just keep flying. We'll make them count the cost of every foot of this canyon. Buy your minutes. Out. 28 minutes. Command Stormglass, you heard Viper 8. We heard. Hayes. Captain, those men are about to pick a fight with a force twice their size on 40 rounds to buy you time. Do not waste it. I don't intend to, sir. 25 minutes. The amber fuel lights were still steady, still climbing slow. Still a lie, according to Dawson, and Emily made herself believe him because she had to put that fear in a box and set it down. 22 minutes. The terrain under her began to rise, the empty country giving way to the broken ground that fed toward the ridgelines of Raven's Edge. And she dropped Thunderbolt 3 lower and lower, hugging the earth, now flying in the ground and clutter, where the enemy's radar would have the hardest time picking her out from the rock. 18 minutes. Stormglass Ellis, be advised, the North Ridge just launched. Not at you. Repeat, not at you. They fired into the canyon. Somebody down there gave them a target. Emily's blood went cold. Say again. They fired into their own canyon. Affirmative. 2 launches, both into the canyon floor western section. Captain, I think... Ellis's voice was tight. I think that was Viper 8 being expensive. I think Coleman made a move aggressive enough that the enemy answered it with missiles meant for aircraft. They just spent 2 man pads on 11 men with 40 rounds. Whatever Coleman did, it scared somebody. And there it was, the thing Emily had asked for, the doubt made real. Somewhere in that canyon, 11 exhausted, bleeding men had done something so aggressive, so unexpected, that a commander with an air defense network had panicked and fired anti-aircraft missiles at infantry. It was insane. It was desperate. And it meant 2 of the missiles that would otherwise be waiting for Thunderbolt 3 were now gone, burned off into the rock, because 11 men had made themselves expensive on Emily's word. Coleman, she keyed, and she couldn't keep it entirely out of her voice. Viper 8 Stormglass, you still with me? Report. For a long, terrible second, there was nothing. Then breathless, ragged, but alive. Stormglass, Viper 8, still here. All 11. We poked the bear, ma'am. Bear poked back with the big stuff. A cough and something that might have been a laugh. Couple of us, sir, a little more deaf than we were, but we made them reset. Whole assault line pulled back to regroup. You got your 2 minutes, maybe 3. Where are you, Airman? 18 minutes out and closing in Coleman. Send it. That was the best thing I've ever heard a ground element do. Now get back in your holes, because I'm about to make the rest of this canyon very loud, and this time it's going to be my kind of loud. Stormglass out. 16 minutes. The ridgelines of Raven's Edge rose ahead of her, now dark shapes against a darker sky, and Emily felt something turn over in her chest, something between dread and homecoming. Because there it was, the canyon that had nearly killed her. The canyon she had sworn never to fly the canyon. She now understood she had never really left. 3 years she had flown it in her mind every night. And here it was, real, waiting, exactly as terrible and exactly as familiar as she remembered. Command Stormglass, I have the ridgeline visual. Beginning terrain masking for final approach. From this point, I'm going to be in and out of comms as the walls block me. If you lose me, don't panic. I'm down in the rock where I belong. Copy Stormglass. Hayes' voice, and under the command calm, there was something almost like a prayer. We've got extraction birds spinning up and holding at the rally point 30 miles south, waiting on your word that the machine gun corridor is clear. The second you open that door, they come. Everything's staged. It all comes down to you now, Captain. Understood, sir. 14 minutes, and then Ellis fast and urgent. Stormglass Northridge is tracking. They've got you. 2 systems just went active, and they're painting your approach. They see you coming across the north face, launch warning, missile in the air. The first missile came off the ridge, and this was the moment 3 years of nights spent flying this canyon in her head had prepared her for. Emily didn't think. Her hands moved before her mind finished processing. The warning rolling Thunderbolt 3, hard diving, lower still, putting the bulk of a ridgeline between herself and the launch, because she knew this terrain. She knew that a missile fired from that position on the north ridge had to clear the intervening spur before it could track her. And if she got below the spur in the next 2 seconds, the missile would lose its lock on the cold rock. The missile climbed, searched, and found nothing but stone. It went stupid and flew into the far wall. Missile defeated, Emily called. Already leveling, already pressing on. Terrain masking worked. Ellis, that's one of them shot. Where's the second system? Second system's tracking, but he doesn't have an angle you dropped below his horizon. He can't see you through the spur. Captain, you just flew under a missile like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing major, it was 3 years of homework. Emily's voice was tight, but there was something almost fierce in it now. That's the whole point. That's why it had to be me. Any pilot can see a missile. Only a pilot who knows this canyon knows which piece of rock to hide behind. Keep feeding me. Where are the other systems? 12 minutes to the SEALs. Third system's on the western mouth. He's oriented the wrong way. He can't range you on this approach, Ellis said. Fourth we think is destroyed. That's one of the two they fired into the canyon. So you've got one active system that can't see you and one that just missed. Stormglass, the north face is cracking open. You're through the worst of the air defense. You're almost in. Almost in. Emily allowed herself exactly one breath of relief and then killed it because almost in meant the easy part was done and the hard part, the reason no other aircraft could do this, was about to begin. Because getting past the missiles just meant she got to fly into the canyon, and the canyon itself was the real killer. Command Stormglass, I'm at the eastern mouth. I'm going in. From here, I'm below the ridgeline the whole way, so expect to lose my transmissions. I'm going to work the machine gun corridor first because that's the door those extraction birds need open. Have them ready to launch on my call. She took a breath. And gentlemen, whatever you hear or don't hear in the next few minutes, I've got this. I know this place. Stormglass going in. 10 minutes to the SEALs, and Emily Carter flew Thunderbolt 3 into Raven's Edge Canyon. The walls came up around her, close and dark, and exactly where she remembered them, and every warning system in the aircraft began to scream at once as the terrain crowded in the ground. Proximity B, the wall spacing all of it shrieking that no sane pilot flew here, that she was too low, too tight, too fast. Emily reached out and silenced the oral warnings with a flick, not because they were wrong, but because she already knew that everything they were trying to tell her, and their noise was just noise now, the panic of a machine that didn't understand that this was exactly where she meant to be. All right, she said to the aircraft, to herself, to the canyon. Hello again. Let's see if you still move the way you used to. And the canyon answered. 2/3 of the way, and right where the map in her head said it would be, right where it had been 3 years ago, the wind funneling through the eastern mouth slammed into the north wall and came off it as a rolling column of air. The rotor, the same rotor that had flipped an unprepared rescue bird into the rock and gotten a good pilot blamed for error. Emily felt it building in a half second before it hit. Felt the aircraft start to lift, in yaw, and where any other pilot would have fought, it hauled against it and been slung into the wall. Emily did the thing that only made sense if you had flown this canyon 100 times in the dark of your own mind. She let it push her. She rolled into the rotor instead of against it, used its own force to sling Thunderbolt 3 across the width of the canyon, and rode the invisible wave exactly the way she'd known she would, coming out of it low and fast and lined up on the one axis in the whole canyon from which the A-10's cannon could reach the machine gun corridor along the northern wall without flying into the far side. Come to Mama, Emily breathed. The machine gun nests were right where Coleman's reports and the launch logs said they'd be dug into the rocks along the northern wall. The interlocking guns that had kept every rescue bird out of this canyon for 2 days, the guns that were the whole reason those extraction helicopters were sitting 30 miles away instead of pulling 11 men to safety. The gunners had built their positions to face the mouths of the canyon, the approaches, the directions aircraft came from. They had never once imagined a threat coming at them from inside their own kill zone, low along their own wall, riding a wind they thought was their ally. Emily squeezed the trigger. The A-10's cannon spoke, and its voice was not the crack of a rifle or the chatter of a machine gun, but something older and more terrible. And a long, tearing roar that rolled between the canyon walls and shook the rock. The sound of the entire aircraft built around a single gun, and where that gun pointed, the first machine gun nest simply ceased to exist. 9 minutes. Command Stormglass, she called, knowing they might not hear her down in the rock calling anyway. First gun position is down. First gun is down, working the corridor. She hauled the aircraft around, pulling more from it than the airframe was ever advertised to give, and came back down the northern wall from the other direction, and the second nest, whose gunners had just watched the first one vanish, and were only now beginning to understand that the impossible was happening, that death had come into their canyon from the one direction they'd left unguarded, tried to swing their gun around to face her. They were far, far too slow. The cannon roared again and the second position went silent. 8 minutes. Down on the canyon floor, 11 men who had been counting bullets and preparing for a last stand heard the sound they had been told would never come. They heard echoing between the walls growing unmistakable, the guttural roar of an A-10's engines, and then the world-ending tearing sound of its cannon, and they heard the machine guns that had trapped them for 2 days go silent, one after another. And Wade Coleman, senior chief, keyed his radio with a hand that shook and his voice broke completely when he transmitted, and no man in that canyon thought less of him for it. "Stormglass Viper 8. He could barely get it out. "We hear you. God is my witness, ma'am. We hear you. The guns are stopping. The guns are stopping. You're doing it. You're actually doing it." Emily heard him faint, broken up by the walls, and she pressed the aircraft into a third pass along the corridor, hunting the last of the machine gun positions, and she keyed back the only thing there was to say. "Told you I was coming, Senior Chief. Now stage those casualties. The door is about to open." 7 minutes, and above the canyon on the northern ridge, the enemy commander who had laughed into a stolen radio, who had built a perfect trap facing the front door and left the back door wide open, who had grown impatient and pushed his men down into the canyon and fired his precious missiles at infantry, stood and watched the impossible unfold below him. He watched his machine gun positions, the anchor of his entire trap, get erased one by an aircraft that had come from a direction he had sworn no one could come from, flown by a pilot riding a wind he had believed was his own weapon. And the doubt that had first crossed his face at the sound of an unfamiliar engine hardened now into something colder, because a man who builds a perfect cage and then watches something walk straight through the bars is a man forced to understand all at once that he never understood the thing he was hunting at all. He grabbed his radio. He began screaming orders at the assault line he'd pulled back to regroup, ordering them forward again, now immediately ordering them to rush the SEAL position and finish it before the aircraft could turn its attention from the walls to the floor. If he couldn't stop the plane, he would win the race. 11 exhausted, bleeding Americans against a fresh assault line of 20, and if he could kill them in the next 4 minutes, then let the aircraft roar all it wanted, there would be no one left to rescue. 6 minutes, and Emily, coming off her third pass with the machine gun corridor going quiet, caught a flicker of movement on the canyon floor, and her blood ran cold as she understood what she was seeing. The assault line, moving again. Fast now, no longer regrouping, but charging a wave of fighters rushing toward the huddle of rock where 11 men and 40 rounds waited. The commander had changed the game one final time. He couldn't beat her aircraft, so he was going to beat her clock. And the terrible truth landed on Emily all at once, that clearing the machine guns meant nothing if the assault reached the SEALs before she could stop it, that she had been so focused on opening the door for the helicopters that the enemy had launched a foot race for the lives of the men she'd come to save. "Coleman," she called, hauling the aircraft around hard, fighting the canyon and the geometry, and every screaming warning to bring the cannon to bear on the canyon floor without hitting the very men she was trying to protect. "Assault line's coming. They're coming at you now. I see them. Get down. Get everybody down as low as you can and mark your position." "Mark it. I have to thread this and there's no margin. Do you copy? Mark your position." And through the static, through the walls, through the roar of the engines and the chaos of the assault came Wade Coleman's voice, steady now in the way of a man who has decided to trust another human being completely with his life and the lives of his brothers, calling out the position, calling out the line his men would hold, giving Emily Carter the one thing she needed and the most dangerous thing he could give, the exact location of 11 Americans in the path of the gun. Emily lined up the pass. The assault line filled her sight. Coleman's men huddled just beyond it, close, so close, impossibly close, feet where there should have been hundreds of yards. There was no margin. There was no safe version. There was only the pilot. Everyone had called reckless flying the canyon. Everyone said couldn't be flown, with her thumb on the trigger, and 11 lives in the space between one decision and the next. She pressed forward and she took the shot. The cannon roared, and for one endless second, Emily Carter did not breathe, because she had put a wall of fire down the length of a canyon floor with 11 Americans lying feet from the edge of it, and there is no training in the world that makes that second easier. No number of missions that lets a pilot exhale while the rounds are still walking across the ground toward men she came to save. Then it was over. and the assault line was simply gone. The wave of fighters that had been rushing the SEAL position erased between one heartbeat and the next, and the dust rolled, and the canyon rang, and Emily hauled Thunderbolt 3 up and away before the far wall could take her, her heart slamming so hard she could feel it in her teeth. "Coleman," she called, and she hated how her voice shook. Hated it, but she couldn't stop it. "Coleman, report. Did I hit clean? Talk to me, Senior Chief. Are your men?" For 2 full seconds, there was nothing but static, and those 2 seconds were the longest of Emily Carter's life. Longer than the 6 weeks in the office, longer than the whole flight in 2 seconds, in which she lived out every version of the answer she could not bear to hear. Then Wade Coleman's voice came through ragged, disbelieving alive. "Stormglass, Viper 8, all 11, ma'am. You put that fire so close, I felt the heat come off it. I felt it on my face, but you threaded it. You threaded it. The assault line's gone. They're gone, and we're here. We're all still here." Emily let out a breath that was almost a sob and pressed it back down where it belonged because she was not done. She was nowhere near done, and there would be time to fall apart later, or there would be no need to. "Copy that, Viper 8, all 11. She keyed command. "Break, command, Stormglass. How do you read?" The walls must have opened up enough because haze came through faint, but there. "Stormglass command, weak but readable. Say your status. We lost you for 4 minutes, and this room has not taken a breath the whole time. Machine gun corridor is clear. Repeat, the corridor is clear. All primary gun positions destroyed. Enemy attempted a ground assault on the friendly position. Assault is neutralized. Casualties on the friendly side are unchanged still. Too urgent, all 11 personnel alive." She took a breath. "Command, the door is open. Send the birds. Send them now. Send them now." The command center 30 miles and a lifetime away erupted, and Emily could hear it even through the static, the sound of a room full of people who had been holding a single breath for 4 minutes, finally letting it go all at once, and under it, Hayes's voice sharp and immediate. Extraction flight. This is command, the corridor is clear. You are cleared inbound. Go. Stormglass has opened the door. Get in there and get our people." 12 minutes since the extraction, birds had been sitting cold at the rally point. Now they were moving. But Emily knew something the command center didn't, something she could see from where she was, and they could only guess it, and it turned the taste of victory to ash in her mouth. Because as she came around for another circuit of the canyon, staying low, staying between the walls, staying in the one place the surviving air defense couldn't reach her, she looked down at the canyon floor and her stomach dropped because the assault line she had destroyed was not the only enemy in the canyon. Up on the northern ridge near the machine gun position she'd silenced, there was movement. Not much, but enough. The commander had held reserves. Of course he had. A man who built a trap this careful, this patient, did not commit everyone to a single assault. He had a second wave held back on the high ground, and Emily watched them beginning to move not down toward the SEALs this time, but into new positions along the walls, and she understood with a cold clarity exactly what they were doing. They were setting up to shoot down the helicopters. "Command, Stormglass, belay the extraction. Belay, she called, hauling the aircraft around. "Do not send the birds yet. I have enemy repositioning on the northern wall. They're setting up along the extraction corridor. If you send those helicopters in right now, they fly into a fresh ambush. Say again, hold the birds. Hold the birds. Stormglass command, say again you're breaking up." The walls chose that exact moment to swallow her transmission, and Emily felt the panic claw up her throat because somewhere 30 miles south, 2 helicopters full of pararescuemen were now inbound to a canyon she just told them was safe, and the one piece of information that could keep them alive had just been eaten by 1,000 feet of rock. "Command, do you read? Command, Stormglass abort the extraction. They'll be flying into a trap." She climbed, desperate to clear the walls, desperate to get her signal out. And climbing meant exposing herself to the surviving missile system on the western mouth, and she did it anyway because a missile that might hit her was a better trade than helicopters that would certainly die. "Command, Stormglass. Hold the birds, respond." And then through the static, faint, but there, Ellis, "Stormglass command. We read you now. Say again your last. We did not copy the extraction. Flight is 9 minutes out and inbound." 9 minutes, and the helicopters were already committed, already flying toward the ambush, and Emily had maybe 2 minutes of clear signal before the walls swallowed her again. "Listen to me. Listen carefully. I only get to say this once, she said fast, every word clipped and precise. The corridor is clear of machine guns, but the enemy has repositioned a second element onto the northern wall to ambush the extraction. If the birds fly the planned route, they die. You cannot send them on the planned corridor. Do you copy that part, yes or no? Copy birds cannot fly the planned corridor. There is a second out. Emily's mind was moving faster than her mouth, pulling up the map that lived in her bones, the canyon she had flown 10,000 times in the dark. There's a southern approach, a lower cut along the southern wall. It's tighter, the pilots won't like it, but it's masked from the northern ridge the whole way in. The enemy set up to face the main corridor. They're not watching the south cut, same reason they never armed the eastern mouth. They can't imagine anybody using it. Route the extraction birds up the southern cut low, right on the deck, and I will get above them and kill anything on that northern wall that so much as looks at them. Do you copy the plan? There was a pause, and Emily could picture Ellis and Hayes and Park all looking at the map at once, all seeing the thin, impossible line she was describing, all knowing that if they were wrong, 2 more aircraft and their crews would die in this canyon tonight. Storm glass. Hayes came on, and his voice was heavy with the weight of it. You're asking me to route 2 helicopters full of my people up a canyon cut that isn't on any approved approach based on a picture only you can see that we cannot confirm. If you're wrong, lose the extraction flight and the men on the ground both. I know exactly what I'm asking, sir. Emily's voice did not waver. And I'm telling you, I have flown that southern cut 3 years ago. It's how I got out the last time. It's real, it's flyable, and it's the only way those birds live. You put me back in this cockpit because I can see things nobody else can see. Well, I'm seeing one now. Trust it. Trust me. Send them up the south cut and let me cover the wall. The seconds stretched, and then Colonel Richard Hayes made the second impossible decision of his night, the same decision he'd made on the flight line. The decision to trust the pilot everyone had called reckless over the picture on his own wall. Extraction Flight Command, new routing standby to copy. This is not a suggestion. This is a direct order, and it comes from me. And then Hayes read out the southern cut, the route Emily had described, and Emily heard the extraction pilots acknowledge, heard the doubt in their voices, and heard them swallow it because the colonel had spoken, and she felt the whole weight of it settle onto her shoulders because now 2 more crews were flying a route that existed nowhere but in her memory. 8 minutes. Coleman Stormglass, she called down. Change of plan. The birds are coming in from the south. Now, the southern cut, not the main corridor. When they get close, they're going to be low and tight against the southern wall. You need to move your casualties to the southern side of your position. The south side, do you copy, because that's where the birds are going to be. And Coleman, do it fast because the enemy's got a second element on the north wall waiting to ambush, and I'm about to be very busy keeping them off you. Copy, moving to the south side, moving the casualties now. A grunt of effort, the sound of men lifting wounded brothers. Stormglass, how'd you know about a second route? We looked at this canyon for a week before we ever inserted, and we never found a south cut. Because you were reading a map, Emily said, hauling the aircraft up toward the northern ridge where the ambush was setting. I flew it. There's a difference, Senior Chief. There's a whole world of difference. And then she was climbing, exposing herself, coming up level with the northern wall, where the second enemy element was digging in, and she said mostly to herself, all right, you want to ambush my helicopters. Let's see how you like being the one who's surprised. 7 minutes and Emily went to work on the northern wall. The enemy element up there had made the same mistake their commander had made from the very beginning. They were all oriented one direction, watching the main corridor, watching the south approach. They expected the birds to have to use their backs and their flanks turned to the interior of the canyon, where no aircraft could possibly be. And Emily came at them from exactly that impossible interior from below and behind, riding the walls, and the first they knew of her was the tearing roar of the cannon. She hit the first ambush position, and it came apart. She hauled around, fighting the canyon, and hit the second. Warning lights bloomed across her panel as she pushed the aircraft past every limit it was built for the fuel imbalance. Caution still glowing amber, and now new ones joining it, the airframe protesting the abuse, and Emily read them all in a half-second and pressed on because there was no version of this where she flew gently. Stormglass Ellis, your aircraft's telemetry is scaring the whole room. You've got caution stacking, that fuel imbalance is climbing again. I know, Major. I'm reading it. Put it in the box. I'll deal with it when the birds are out. Captain, if that's a real fuel leak and not a sensor, then I'll find out the hard way, Major, but not until those men are on the helicopters. Now let me work. She hauled around for another pass, and they're coming up the southern cut, exactly where she'd sent them, low-tight hugging the wall. She saw them, the two extraction birds, threading the impossible route on nothing but her word and Hayes's order and their own raw nerve. And her heart clenched because they were beautiful, and they were vulnerable, and they were entirely, completely dependent on her keeping that northern wall clean. 6 minutes. Command Stormglass. I have the extraction, birds visual. They're in the south cut there en route, and they're flying it perfect. Tell those pilots they're doing beautiful work. She rolled on to the next ambush position. I'm clearing the north wall ahead of them. Coleman, are your casualties staged on the south side? Casualties are staged. South side, we're ready. We're ready. Just get the birds to us. And then it happened, the thing Emily had been dreading since she first saw the second element move. The thing that no amount of skill could fully prevent, because the enemy commander was not a fool, and even a surprised enemy has reflexes. As the lead helicopter came up the southern cut toward the SEAL position, a fighter Emily had not seen dug in low and alone on a shelf of the southern wall itself. The one wall she'd thought was safe rose up with a shoulder-launched missile and fired at the lead bird from almost point-blank range. Missile, south wall launch on the lead bird. Emily screamed it, and there was nothing she could do. She was on the wrong side, wrong angle, too far. The missile was already off the rail, and the helicopter was fat and slow and low, and there was no time. No time at all, and Emily watched the whole 3 years of homework and the whole impossible flight and the whole promise she'd made to 11 men come down to a single missile she could not stop. And Wade Coleman stopped it. Because the SEALs on the ground staged on the south side exactly where Emily had put them were close enough to see the fighter rise up on that shelf, and in the half second before the launch, a SEAL named Reyes, one of the 11, one of the men with almost no bullets left, spent some of his precious few on the only target that mattered. And it wasn't enough to kill the shooter before he fired, but it was enough to make him flinch. And the missile that would have flown straight into the belly of the lead helicopter instead went wide by a body's width and burned itself out against the canyon wall beyond. Birds clear! Birds clear! The missile missed, Coleman was shouting. Reyes made him flinch. The missile went wide. The lead bird's okay. Emily was already rolling in on the shelf, already bringing the cannon around, and she caught the shooter as he was trying to reload for a second shot, and the A-10's gun ended that argument permanently. 5 minutes, and the lead helicopter flared into the SEAL position, and Emily watched from above as 11 exhausted, bleeding impossible men began loading their wounded aboard, and she wanted to watch. She wanted to see it, but she couldn't because her job wasn't done, and watching was a luxury for people whose job was done. Command Stormglass lead bird is on the ground at the friendly position, loading casualties. Now second bird is on short final. I am covering the extraction from above. Joe, quiet on the walls. Keep those birds moving. The faster they load, the faster we all go home. Copy Storm. Glass, we see it on the feed. We see it. Hayes's voice cracked just slightly. The crack of a man watching something he'd been told was impossible happen in real time. Captain, the whole room is on its feet. Just keep them covered. Bring them out. 4 minutes, and the loading went faster than Emily dared hope. SEALs are not gentle with each other in a crisis, and they threw their wounded aboard and piled in after. And Emily circled above them like something out of an old story, an ugly guardian angel with a gun the size of a car, watching the walls, watching the ridges, watching for the next thing the enemy would try, because there was always a next thing. And the next thing came from the man himself. Up on the northern ridge, the enemy commander watched his second element die, watched his ambush collapse, watched the helicopters. He'd been so certain he could kill, loading up the prey. He'd been so certain was already his, and something in him broke the cold patience, finally giving way to a rage that made him abandon every clever plan he'd ever made. He grabbed the last Manpad's launcher himself. He didn't hand it to a soldier. He took it in his own hands, and he climbed to the highest point on the ridge, exposing himself completely, not caring anymore because the trap he'd spent months building was coming apart in front of his eyes, and the only thing left in him was the need to kill something before it was over. And Emily saw him. She saw the lone figure climb to the top of the ridge with a launcher on his shoulder, saw him take a position with a clear line to the extraction birds, And she understood in an instant that this was it. This was the last card, and that the birds were fully loaded now and lifting and utterly defenseless in the vulnerable seconds of their climb. Birds are lifting. Both birds are lifting with all personnel. Coleman's voice jubilant, and then catching Emily's silence sharper. Storm glass, what do you see? Enemy launcher top of the North Ridge. He's got an angle on the birds I'm engaging. Emily was already rolling, but she was out of position. She'd been covering the south wall, and the geometry was wrong, and the man on the ridge was already shouldering the launcher, already tracking the climbing helicopters. And Emily did the math in a quarter second, and the math said she could not get her gun around in time. So she didn't use the gun, she used the aircraft. Emily drove Thunderbolt 3 straight at the ridge, straight at the man with the launcher screaming down out of the dark with all the guttural fury of the engines, and the enemy commander tracking the helicopters. Her death coming at him from the side, and made the human choice, the involuntary choice, the choice any creature makes when a mountain of screaming metal fills its vision. He flinched. He turned. And in the half-second his aim came off the helicopters, Emily's cannon finally coming to bear, as she pulled up, spoke one last time. The ridge went silent. The man who had laughed into a stolen radio, who had told 11 Americans to bleed slow and let their brothers watch, who had built a perfect trap facing the wrong direction, who had grown impatient and then desperate, and then finally at the very end abandoned all his cleverness for one last swing, was gone. And the 2 helicopters, both of them, all their crews, and all 11 of Viper 8, and their 2 urgent casualties still breathing, climbed up out of Raven's Edge Canyon into the open sky where nothing could reach them anymore. 3 minutes. For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. She just flew, watching the 2 birds climb away to the south, watching them clear the ridgelines, watching them reach the safe air. And something enormous and shaking rose up in her chest, and she had to swallow it 3 times before she trusted her voice. "Command," she finally said, and it came out rough. "Storm glass. Both extraction birds are clear of the canyon, climbing out to the south, all personnel aboard. Viper 8 is out. The enemy commander is down. The canyon is..." She had to stop. Start again. "The canyon is ours. 11 went in. 11 are coming home. All of them." The command center did not erupt this time. Something more powerful happened. For a moment, there was total silence. The silence of grown men and women who had watched something they'd been told could not happen, who had prepared themselves for a very different inning, who had written the words for a very different kind of transmission, and now got to throw those words away. And then quietly at first, and then not quietly at all, they began to cheer, and Emily could hear it through her headset, the sound of a room full of people who had just watched 11 Americans come back from a place everyone had already written off. And under it all, Colonel Richard Hayes's voice thick, unashamed. "Storm Glass Command, 11 confirmed aboard. We copy all. Captain Carter." A pause, and when he came back, his voice had gone quiet and private, just for her, though the whole room could hear it. "I put you in that cockpit against every regulation I'm sworn to uphold. And you just brought home 11 men that this entire staff, every expert in this room, myself included, had privately started to bury. I want you to hear me say it while the memory's still hot. You were right about the canyon, about the route, about all of it. You were right and we were wrong, and 11 families are going to get their people back because of it. Now bring yourself home too, Captain. That's an order I'll actually enjoy giving." Emily closed her eyes for 1 second. 1, then opened them. "Copy, sir. Stormglass is coming home." And that was the moment Thunderbolt 3 decided it had given everything it had. The fuel imbalance caution the Amber Light Dawson had called a lie chose that instant to become the truth. A new light bloomed beside it, red this time, and then another, and Emily felt it before the instruments finished telling her, felt the aircraft change under her hands, felt the right engine begin to lose its song. "Command Stormglass," she said, and the exhaustion and triumph drained out of her voice, all at once replaced by the flat calm that meant things had just gotten bad. "Be advised, I have a right engine problem developing. That fuel imbalance wasn't a sensor. Ray was wrong, and he's going to hate that he was wrong. I've got a real leak, and I've been running that engine past every limit for the last 20 minutes. Temperatures are climbing. I'm going to lose it." Dawson's voice cut in instantly, and all the earlier warmth was gone, replaced by the razor focus of a man who had spent 22 years keeping aircraft in the sky. Captain, listen to me. Forget I ever said censor. I was wrong and I'll wear that right now. You fly the airplane. What are your indications on the number two? Exactly read them to me. Emily read them off: the temperatures, the pressures, the numbers climbing toward the place where numbers turn into fire, and 2 minutes out from the canyon with 11 men safe behind her, Captain Emily. Carter found herself in a crippled aircraft with a dying engine and a fuel leak, and a long way still to go, and the cruel arithmetic of it settled over her that she had flown into the impossible and won and might not live to land the victory. Ray, she said quietly, cutting through the stream of numbers. Straight answer, same as before. Can I make it home on one engine, or am I looking for somewhere to put her down? And Master Sergeant Ray Dawson, who had promised her she would come home, who had told her not to break the second half of the legend, went silent on the other end of the radio because for the first time all night, he did not have an answer he was sure of. The silence on the radio lasted 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, Emily Carter understood exactly how serious it was because Ray Dawson always had an answer. And the only time he didn't was when the truth was too ugly to say fast. Ray, she said again, talk to me, I can take it. What I can't take is you thinking so long I have to guess. His voice came back, and it was steady, but it was the kind of steady a man builds on purpose. Okay, here's the truth, Captain No Sugar. On a good day, that airplane flies fine on one engine. It's built to, but you don't have a good day. You have got a fuel leak on the side that's still working, which means the engine you're counting on to get you home is drinking from a tank that's emptying faster than it should. So this isn't a one-engine problem. It's a race between how far home is and how much fuel you've got left before the good engine dies too. So run the race for me. I'm running it. She could hear him working, hear the click of a keyboard, hear him talking low to someone in the room. Home base is 110 miles. That's the problem. 110 miles is a long way on a leaking tank and a sick engine. Then give me somewhere closer. Another pause. Ellis's voice came in. Stormglass, there's a forward strip call sign outpost Kilo 62 miles south-southeast of your position. It's short, it's rough, it's not built for fixed wing recovery, but it's dirt and it's flat and it's 62 miles instead of 110. 62 miles. Emily looked at her. Fuel looked at the temperature still climbing on the number 2 engine and did the math the same way she'd done all the other math tonight. Cold and fast and without flinching. Ray, straight answer. Can I make 62 miles? 62, maybe. 110, no. Dawson's voice was flat. Captain, I'm telling you to take Kilo. Don't try to be a hero and bring my airplane all the way home. Get on the ground while the ground's still your choice and not the engine's choice. You hear me? Take the sure thing. 59 minutes of fuel maybe on a leak that was getting worse. 62 miles to a strip that wasn't built for her. Emily banked Thunderbolt 3, south-southeast, pointing the wounded aircraft at Outpost Kilo, and keyed the radio. Copy, Ray. Turning for Kilo. Command Stormglass is diverting to Outpost Kilo, 62 miles, requesting they roll every fire and rescue asset they've got to the strip, because I'm going to arrive hot, heavy, and probably on one engine. Copy, Storm. Glass, alerting Icolome. Now they're rolling everything. And then, because Emily Carter's night was not done being cruel, the number 2 engine, the one that was supposed to get her to Kilo, chose that moment to remind her that leaking fuel and climbing temperatures don't wait for convenient timing. The temperature needle jumped. Then a low shudder ran through the airframe, a wrongness she felt in her spine before she saw it on the panel, and the red lights she'd been dreading all lit at once. Ray number 2's letting go temps just spiked. I've got a vibration. She's coming apart on me. Pull it back. Pull the power back on. 2. Don't let it eat itself, baby. It keep just enough to fly. Emily was already doing it, easing the throttle back on the failing engine, trying to coax just enough life out of it to keep the aircraft in the air without asking so much that it tore itself apart. And this was the tightrope. This was the thing no simulator ever truly taught, keeping a dying engine alive by asking it for exactly the amount it could still give and not 1 pound more. 48 miles to Kilo, Ellis called. Stormglass, you're 48 out. 48 miles, and Emily flew them one at a time, nursing a sick engine, watching a fuel gauge fall faster than it should. And for the first time all night, she let herself feel how tired she was. 6 weeks of sitting in an office, and then a flight into the impossible. And now this, the long limp home with the aircraft dying under her. And she understood that exhaustion was its own enemy, now that a tired pilot makes the small mistakes that kill you when everything else has already tried and failed. Command patch me to Viper 8 if you can, she said. I want to know they made it. Stand by Stormglass. A moment and then Wade Coleman's voice, and it was different now, cleaner, the voice of a man who was on a helicopter instead of in a hole. Stormglass Viper 8, we're airborne and clear all 11. Both my urgent casualties are stable, and the corpsmen are working them. They're going to make it, ma'am. Both of them are going to make it because of you. We're 20 minutes from the field hospital. A pause and his voice dropped. Command tells me you're in trouble up there. Tells me you took hits keeping that last launcher off us and now you're limping. Is that true? It's a little true, Senior Chief. How little? Emily looked at the dying engine, the falling fuel, the 40-some miles between her and dirt. I've got a sick engine and a fuel leak and a short strip to aim for. It's going to be close, but close isn't the same as bad. There was a silence, and when Coleman came back, his voice had something raw in it. Stormglass, Emily, I don't know your first name for sure, but I'm going to use it. You flew across the armed face of that canyon for us. You threaded a gun run between our bodies close enough that I felt the heat on my face. You found a route out of that place that wasn't on any map anybody ever made. And you put your own airplane between a missile and my men at the end. 11 of us are alive and breathing right now. 2 of us who had no business surviving are going to see their kids again, and every bit of that is you. So you listen to me. You get that airplane on the ground, whatever it takes. Because there are 11 men on this helicopter who need you to walk away from this, and there's going to be a whole lot more than 11 who need to shake your hand. You do not get to save us and then not make it yourself. That's not how this ends. You hear me? Emily's throat was tight. I hear you, Senior Chief. Coleman, my name's Wade, and I'll be on the ground waiting to buy you the first drink of the rest of your life. Now fly your airplane. Viper 8 out, 40 miles to Kilo. Something in Coleman's voice had put steel back in her spine, and Emily flew the next stretch clean, nursing the engine, watching the numbers, and for a few minutes it looked like maybe, just maybe, the arithmetic was going to work out in her favor. And then the number 2 engine, which had been dying slowly, decided to die all at once. The temperature needle went past its limit, the vibration climbed from a shudder to a violent shaking, and Emily knew there was nothing left to nurse. It's gone, ray number 2 is gone. I'm shutting it down before it comes apart and takes the airframe with it, securing the engine now. Do it, shut it down, secure it. You've got the left engine, fly the left engine. Emily shut down the ruined engine, feeling the aircraft yaw hard as the thrust died on one side, catching it with rudder holding it. And now she was exactly where every pilot dreads to be, a single-engine airplane wounded low on fuel, still miles from anywhere, and the whole thing balanced on one engine that might have its own problems she didn't know about yet. 33 miles to Kilo, Ellis said, and there was strain in his voice now. The strain of a man watching telemetry that kept getting worse. Stormglass single-engine 33 mile. Copy 33. Emily's voice was flat calm, the calm that comes out the far side of fear. Ray, the leak. Talk to me about the leak. Is the left tank leaking too, or just the right? Just the right, near as we can tell from here. The engine you're on is drinking from a good tank. That's the one piece of good news you've got. A pause. But Captain, you burned a lot getting this far, and you burned it fast when you were pushing both engines in the canyon. I'm not going to lie to you about the number. You've got the fuel to make Kilo, barely, if nothing else goes wrong. But there's no reserve. None. You get one approach. You don't get a go-around. You don't get a second try. If you come in wrong, you don't get to climb out and set up again, because there won't be fuel to do it. One approach, one landing, and it has to be right. One approach, one landing. A short dirt strip, not built for her aircraft at night, single engine, no second chances. Copy, Ray. One approach. Emily almost laughed, and it came out as something closer to a breath. You know, this whole night everybody kept telling me I only get one shot at everything. One route into the canyon, one gun run between Coleman's men, one pass at that last launcher, and now one landing. She shook her head in the cockpit where no one could see. I'm getting real tired of one shot, Ray. You've been perfect on every one so far, Dawson said quietly. One more. Just one more, Captain. 28 miles. And then Ellis's voice tight, urgent, the voice of a man who has just seen something new go wrong. Stormglass Command, be advised, Outpost Kilo is reporting weather moving in over the strip, visibility. Dropping, they have got a dust condition rolling across the field. They're telling me the strip's going to be marginal in about 10 minutes. Emily closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Of course the strip was going to go marginal, because that was the kind of night it was. How marginal, Major? Give me a number. They're saying if you're not on the ground in the next 8 to 10 minutes, they can't guarantee you'll be able to see the strip to land on it. 28 miles, 8 to 10 minutes, single engine, no reserve fuel, and now a closing window of visibility on top of it all. Emily looked at the airspeed, looked at the distance, looked at the dying margins on every side of her, and understood that she had just been handed one more impossible piece of arithmetic, and that she was going to have to fly the airplane faster and lower and more precisely than a wounded single-engine aircraft was ever meant to be flown, to beat the dust to a strip she'd never seen. Copy 8 to 10 minutes, she said. Ray, I'm going to have to push the approach. Fast and low and direct, no time for a comfortable pattern. Tell me the left engine can take it. The left engine's the only thing on that airplane I still trust, Dawson said. Push it. But Captain, fast and low into a short strip means you've got no room for error on the flare. You come in too fast, you float off the far end. Too slow, you drop it in short. On dirt. At night. In dust. His voice caught. I've never wanted to be in a cockpit with you more than I do right now. And I've never been more useless to you. This one's all you. They're all me, Ray. That's the job. But there was warmth in it even now. Stay on the radio, even if you can't do anything. Just stay on it. I don't want to fly this last part alone. I'm not going anywhere, not until your wheels are stopped. 20 miles. Emily pushed Thunderbolt 3 lower and faster, driving the wounded aircraft toward a strip she couldn't yet see, and she began the ritual that every pilot knows, the running mental checklist, the litany that keeps the fear boxed and the hands working. Airspeed, altitude. Fuel, don't look at the fuel. There's nothing the fuel can tell you that you don't already know. Engine 1, engine temperatures, good pressures. Good, it's holding, it's holding. Gear, not yet. Gear comes down late so it doesn't slow you. Flaps staged. The strip somewhere ahead in the dark, coming toward her at the far edge of what the fuel would allow. 15 miles, Ellis called. Kilo has you on radio, and they're lighting what they can of the strip. But Stormglass, the dust is on the field now. They're saying you might not see the runway lights until you're right on top of it. Copy 15. Emily's eyes were straining forward into the dark. Kilo Stormglass, if you can hear me, keep talking to me. I need you to be my eyes because I'm not going to see you until the last second. Talk me down. A new voice, young tense, an air traffic controller at a dirt outpost who had probably never in his life talked down a crippled A-10 in a dust storm at night. Stormglass Kilo Tower, we hear you. We've got you. We're going to talk you all the way in. Just fly the airplane and let us do the seeing. You're cleared to land any runway, any direction. Will take you however you come. 12 miles. Ray, Emily said quietly while the controller was clearing his throat. If this goes wrong, it's not going to. Ray, this time. If it does, I need you to know something. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. 6 weeks in that office, watching that flight line. I thought that was going to be how it ended. I thought I was going to spend the rest of my career as a cautionary tale, the reckless pilot they had to ground. And you never once let me believe that. Every day you came into that little office and you treated me like a pilot when everybody else treated me like a problem. So whatever happens in the next 10 minutes, you already gave me the thing that mattered. You gave me back the person I was. I got to be a pilot one more time because you refused to let me forget I was one. Thank you, Ray. There was a long silence, and when Dawson answered, his voice was thick and rough, and he didn't try to hide it. Captain, you bring my airplane home and you can thank me over a cold one. And if you don't, if the worst happens, I'm going to spend the rest of my life telling anybody who'll listen the true story, not the paperwork one. The story of the pilot who flew into a canyon, everybody rode off and brought home 11 men, and then flew a dying airplane through a dust storm because she wasn't done saving people yet. That's the story. That's you. Now quit talking like it's good and land the airplane, because I did not spend 22 years under aircraft to lose the best pilot I ever wrenched for on a dirt strip. Fly it home, Emily. Fly it home. 8 miles. Oh, Stormglass Kilo, you're 8 miles out. You're lined up on our strip, come left. 3 degrees, 3 degrees, left. That's it, hold that. Emily came left, 3 degrees, holding the wounded aircraft steady, straining forward into a wall of dust and dark where somewhere a strip of dirt waited. 6 miles. Coming down nicely. Stormglass, you're on glide path, hold your descent. We can't see you yet, but we've got you on the radio and you sound right on the money. 5 miles. And Emily's fuel gauge, the one she'd told herself not to look at, dropped into a place she'd never let an aircraft go before, the place past reserve, past caution, into the numbers where an engine can quit from fuel starvation at any second. 4 miles. Ray, I'm into fumes. I'm flying on fumes now. If this engine quits from starvation in the next 2 minutes, I'm putting her down wherever she lands. You're 4 miles out, Captain. 4 miles. The engine's got 4 miles in it. Fly it, fly it. Don't you dare quit on me now. And don't you let that engine quit either. 3 miles and the dust closed in completely, and Emily could see nothing. Nothing but brown-black murk and the faint smear of something that might be lights. And she flew on instruments and on the controller's voice and on 20 years of muscle memory and on the raw refusal to let it end here. Stormglass Kilo. 2 miles. You're going to break out of the dust low, real low. When you see the strip, you're going to be right on top of it. Be ready. Gear down now. Gear down. Emily dropped the gear, felt it lock, felt the aircraft settle into its landing. Configuration. One engine, no fuel, no second chance, a strip. She still couldn't see, rushing up at her through the murk. 1 mile. Stormglass, you're 1 mile. You're on center line. You're on glide path. Everything's perfect. Just hold it, hold it. The strip's right in front of you. You're going to see it any second. And then she did. The dust thinned for just an instant, just enough, and there it was, a strip of dirt lined with the dim lights of a forward outpost dead ahead, right where the controller's voice had promised it would be, and Emily Carter had exactly 2 seconds to make the last landing of the hardest night of her life. Exactly right, because there was no fuel for a go-around, and no visibility for a second try, and no version of this where she got to do it twice. She pulled the power, she flared, she held the aircraft off the dirt for 1 heartbeat, 2, bleeding the speed, feeling for the ground she could barely see, trusting her hands the way she'd trusted them over the canyon. And then Thunderbolt 3's wheels touched the dirt of Outpost Kilo hard, but true, both mains and then the nose. And Emily stood on the brakes and the aircraft slewed and shuddered down the rough strip, throwing up a rooster tail of dust, fighting for every foot, and for 1 terrible second, she thought the short strip was going to run out before she stopped. And then it didn't. Thunderbolt 3 rolled to a stop at the far end of a dirt strip at a forward outpost on wheels down, right side up in one piece with fumes in the tank and 1 dead engine, and 1 engine that had carried her the last 62 miles on nothing but fuel and will. And for a moment, Emily Carter did not move. She sat in the cockpit with her hands still on the controls and the dust settling around her and the 1 good engine winding down. And she breathed, just breathed in and out, alive on the ground. Done. Ray, she said, and her voice barely worked. Wheels are stopped. I'm down. I'm on the ground at Kilo and I'm in one piece. The radio was silent for a second, and then she heard the whole command center behind Dawson erupt for the 2nd time that night and heard Ray Dawson himself. Master Sergeant Ray Dawson, who had never in 4 years let her see him lose his composure, make a sound that was half a laugh and half something else entirely, and when he spoke, his voice was wrecked. Copy, Captain. Wheels stopped. You're down. A breath. You brought her home. You brought yourself home. I told you that you always come home. And then quieter just for her. Welcome back, Emily, both times tonight. Welcome back. Emily let her head rest against the seat, and she felt the tears come, finally the ones she'd been holding back since the gun run, since Coleman's voice, since the whole impossible night, and she let them because there was no one to see and nothing left to prove, and 11 men were alive, and she was on the ground, and it was over. Then the radio crackled one more time, and it was Colonel Hayes, and his voice was steadier than Dawson's, but only just. Stormglass Command, I've got Outpost Kilo confirming your aircraft down and secure fire and rescue on scene. Pilot reported alive and uninjured. Captain Carter, a pause. 11 operators went into Raven's Edge Canyon. 11 operators came home. And the pilot, everyone in my chain of command told me to keep on the ground, Just flew the impossible twice in one night and walked away from it. You're going to have to give me a while, Captain, because I've got a review board to go, have a very different conversation with than the one they were expecting. But before I do, his voice dropped. Thank you from every man on that helicopter and every family that's about to get a phone call telling them their son is coming home instead of the other call. Thank you, Emily. Now sit tight. We're coming to get you. Command out. And Captain Emily Carter sat in the cockpit of Thunderbolt 3 on a dirt strip in the middle of nowhere, with the dust settling and the engine ticking as it cooled and the whole enormous weight of the night finally slowly beginning to lift off her shoulders. And for the first time in 6 long weeks, she did not feel like a problem or a cautionary tale or a reckless pilot they'd had to ground. She felt like exactly what she was. She felt like the woman who had refused to leave 11 men behind. They came for her within the hour, a recovery team rolling out to Outpost Kilo through the settling dust. And when the first medic climbed up to the cockpit and found Emily Carter sitting there uninjured, calm with dried tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face, he didn't know what to say to her, so he just said the only thing that mattered. Ma'am, the SEAL team made it to the field hospital, all 11. Both the urgent casualties are in surgery, and the docs are saying they're going to pull through. And Emily, who had held herself together through a canyon and a dying engine and a landing on fumes, felt something come loose in her chest at those plain words spoken by a stranger on a ladder. And she nodded because she didn't trust herself to speak. And the medic understood, and he just put a hand on her shoulder and helped her down. The days that followed did not go the way anyone who knew the old Emily Carter would have predicted. Because here is the thing about the military, the review boards in the comfortable rooms never quite prepare a person for. It moves slow when it wants to bury you, and it moves fast when it can no longer afford to. And after Raven's Edge, it could no longer afford to. The first sign came 2 days later, when Emily was still at the forward base, still doing the endless debriefs, still answering the same questions from the same serious men. A message came down the chain. The review board that had spent 6 weeks preparing to end her career had requested her presence. And Emily, sitting in yet another borrowed office, felt the old cold dread come creeping back, because she had been in this movie before, and it always ended the same way, with serious men in comfortable rooms explaining to her why what she had done was wrong. She walked into that room expecting a fight. She did not get one. Colonel Richard Hayes was there, and so were the 3 review officers who had questioned her before, and there was a 4th man she didn't recognize, older with more weight on his shoulders than the others, and Emily braced herself for the familiar words. Reckless, excessive, beyond acceptable limits. Instead, the senior review officer, the same colonel who 3 years ago had leaned across a table and asked her if she understood that she'd gotten lucky, stood up when she entered. He stood up, and he did not sit back down until she had. Captain Carter, he said, and his voice was not the voice. She remembered the cool, dismissive voice of a man grading her from a safe distance. It was quieter than that. I owe you an accounting, and I'm going to give it to you in front of these officers, because if I'm going to be wrong, I'm going to be wrong out loud, the same way I was wrong about you in private for the last 3 years. Emily said nothing. She had learned over 6 weeks that silence was sometimes the only weapon a grounded pilot had. 3 years ago, the colonel went on, you flew into that canyon against orders and brought home a patrol, and I sat across from you, and I told you that you got lucky. I built a review around that word. Lucky. Because if you got lucky, then the rules were still right, and you were still wrong, and the world made sense the way I needed it to make sense. He paused, and something worked behind his face. And then this week, I sat in a command center, and I watched you do it again. On purpose. With a whole staff of experts, myself included, having already concluded it couldn't be done. I watched you predict things about that canyon that our intelligence couldn't confirm and our doctrine couldn't explain, and I watched every single one of them come true. The wind on the north wall, the road the enemy left unguarded, the southern cut that wasn't on any map. You called all of it from memory. From 3 years of flying a canyon in your head that the rest of us couldn't fly with every satellite we own. He looked at her, and for the first time in 3 years, he looked at her like a pilot instead of a problem. That's not luck, Captain. It was never luck. Luck doesn't happen twice on command. What I called luck was the thing I couldn't measure, and because I couldn't measure it, I decided it didn't exist. I was wrong. And 11 men are alive because you were right and I was wrong. The board's finding 3 years ago is being vacated. The current review is being closed with a full exoneration. And there's a recommendation moving up the chain that I suspect is going to change your career in ways I don't have the authority to promise, so I won't. But I will tell you this. He straightened. I've been doing this job for a long time, and I have spent most of it certain that the rulebook was the thing that kept people alive. You taught me something this week that I should have learned decades ago. The rulebook keeps average people alive on average days. It's the ones we call reckless, the ones who see what the book can't, that we send for when the average isn't good enough, and the day is the worst day of somebody's life. I was so busy protecting the book, and I nearly threw away the exact pilot the book exists to serve. I'm sorry, Captain, genuinely, and I'm grateful the men in that canyon didn't have to pay for my mistake. For a long moment, Emily didn't know what to say. She had walked into that room armored for battle, ready to defend every decision one more time, and instead she'd been handed the thing she'd stopped believing she would ever get. Not vindication. Something rarer than that. Understanding. Sir, she finally said, and her voice was steady. I appreciate that. More than I can tell you, but I need you to hear one thing, because if you don't, then the wrong lesson gets learned from all of this. She leaned forward. I wasn't right because I broke the rules. I was right because I did the work. 3 years of flying that canyon in my head, that's not recklessness. That's the most careful thing I've ever done. The pilots who came home saying that canyon beat them, they weren't worse pilots than me. They just didn't know it the way I knew it. So if the lesson anybody takes from Raven's Edge is that we should reward pilots for taking wild risks, then you've learned exactly the wrong thing, and someday it gets somebody killed. The lesson isn't take more risks. The lesson is know the ground under you so completely that what looks like a wild risk to everybody else is actually the only safe path you can see. That's the difference. That's the whole difference. And it's the thing I need you to write down, because I'd rather be forgotten than be turned into an excuse for some kid to fly into a wall trying to be a legend. The colonel looked at her for a long moment, and then slowly he nodded. Write that down, he said to the officer beside him. Word for word, that goes in the finding. They flew her home the next day back to the base where she'd spent 6 weeks watching a flight line through a window. And when Thunderbolt 3's replacement pilot taxied her recovered aircraft back onto that line, repaired the fuel system, fixed the dead engine, replaced Ray Dawson was standing there waiting, and he didn't say anything about airplanes at all. He just wrapped Emily Carter in a hug that lifted her off her feet. This big, quiet man who'd spent 22 years under aircraft and never once let her see him lose his composure. And he held on for a long time, and when he finally set her down, his eyes were wet, and he didn't care who saw. Told you, he said, his voice thick. Told you that you always come home. You did, Emily said. Both times. You told me both times, Ray. Yeah, well. He wiped his face with the back of a grease-stained hand. I've been right about a lot of airplanes over the years, but I've never been so glad to be right about anything as I am right now. He stepped back and looked at her, and something crossed his face, some old fear finally letting go. I sat in that command center, and I listened to that engine die on you, and I couldn't do one single thing about it. 22 years of fixing airplanes, and the one time it mattered most, all I could do was talk. I've never felt so useless in my life. Ray, Emily put her hand on his arm. You weren't useless. You were the whole reason I made it, not because of anything you did to the airplane. Because you stayed on the radio. Because when I was 60 miles out on a dying engine with no fuel and no visibility, I wasn't alone up there. You made sure I was never alone. That's not nothing, Ray. On the worst night of my life, that was everything. Dawson couldn't answer that. He just nodded and squeezed her shoulder and looked away toward the aircraft so she wouldn't see his face. But the moment Emily would remember for the rest of her life, the one that mattered more than the exoneration and the recommendations, and even Dawson's hug on the flight line, came a week later at the field hospital when they finally let her see them. Viper 8, the 11 men from the canyon. They were scattered across a recovery ward, some in beds, some in chairs. The 2 urgent casualties pale and bandaged, but alive. Alive, both of them out of surgery and going to make it. And when Emily walked into that ward, every man who could stand stood. The 2 who couldn't stand tried anyway, and their brothers held them up. And Wade Coleman, Senior Chief, the man whose voice had carried her through the whole impossible night, crossed the room and stopped in front of her. And for a moment, neither of them said anything because there are things that don't have words, and this was one of them. He was younger than his voice had made him sound, and more worn, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who had counted his own bullets and made his peace with a canyon, and then heard an engine come out of the dark to prove that peace unnecessary. "You're shorter than I pictured," Coleman finally said, and his voice cracked halfway through it, and the whole ward laughed the broken, grateful laugh of men who had been to the edge and come back. "Everybody says that," Emily said. And then Wade Coleman stopped smiling, and he took Emily Carter's hand in both of his, and he said the thing he'd been holding since the canyon. "I was ready to die down there," he said quietly. "I'd made my peace. I had my men consolidated, and I had my last rounds counted, and I was doing the math on how to make the end mean something, how to sell it dear enough that maybe a couple of my guys could slip out in the confusion. That's where I was. That's where all 11 of us were." His grip tightened. "And then I heard your voice on the radio, Storm Glass. And I want you to understand what that did because I don't think you can know it from up there in the sky. It wasn't just that help was coming. Men hear that help is coming all the time, and it still doesn't come. It was your voice. There was something in it. You didn't sound like somebody hoping. You sounded like somebody who already knew how it was going to end and was just calling ahead to let us know. You sounded certain. And down in that hole with 40 rounds and 2 dying men, your certainty was the only thing in the whole world that was still solid. We held on because you sounded like somebody worth holding on for." Emily's throat closed. She had flown the canyon. She had threaded the gun run. She had landed on fumes in a dust storm. And none of it had undone her the way 11 men standing in a hospital ward undid her now. "Wade," she managed, "I wasn't certain. I need you to know that. I was terrified the whole time. When I put that gun run down between your men, I didn't breathe until you called back. I thought I might have killed the people I came to save. I wasn't certain of anything." Coleman shook his head slowly, and a small, knowing smile touched his mouth. "That's the part you don't understand, ma'am. That's the part that makes it mean something. If you'd been certain, if you'd been fearless, then you were just a pilot doing a job that happened to work out. But you were terrified, and you came anyway. You were terrified and you flew across the armed face of that canyon anyway. You were terrified and you threaded a gun run you weren't sure of because being sure was a luxury we didn't have time for." He looked around at his men at the 10 faces watching and then back at her. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Captain. Every man in this room could tell you that. Courage is being scared out of your mind and deciding that somebody else's life is worth more than your fear. You were the most scared person over that canyon, and you were the one who came. That's not a smaller thing than being fearless. It's the only thing that's ever mattered." And then one by one, the men of Viper 8 came forward, and each of them took her hand or embraced her, and each of them said something, a name, a thank you, a word about a wife or a child or a mother who was going to see them again because of her. And Emily stood there and received it, all of it, the full weight of 11 lives, and everyone those 11 lives touched. And she understood that this was the thing the medals and the ranks and the exonerations could never quite hold. This was what it had all been for. The man named Reyes, the one who had spent some of his last precious rounds to make a shooter flinch and save the lead helicopter, came last. He was quiet and he held her hand a moment longer than the others. "You know, I nearly didn't take that shot," he said. "The one at the guy on the shelf. I had 4 rounds left. 4. And every instinct I had said, save them. Save them for the end. You're going to need them when they rush you." And then I saw that helicopter coming up the cut, and I thought about the pilot who'd sent it up a route that wasn't on any map, and I thought, if she's spending everything she's got on us, the least I can do is spend everything I've got on them. He swallowed. "I fired 3 of my 4 rounds at that shooter, made him flinch. Missile went wide. And I've thought about it every day since, ma'am. If I'd hoarded those rounds the way my instinct said to that helicopter comes apart in the air, and half of us die in the wreck. Your courage made mine. That's what I wanted to tell you. Down there in the worst of it, watching you spend everything, it made all of us braver than we knew how to be. You didn't just save us. You made us into the kind of men who could help save ourselves." Emily didn't have an answer for that. There wasn't one. She just held on to Reyes's hand and let the tears come, and this time she didn't fight them because there was nothing left to prove and everything to feel. The recommendations moved up the chain, and in time they became more than recommendations. Emily Carter was not only reinstated but decorated, and the citation when it was finally read aloud did not use the word reckless even once. The career that had been set down in a drawer and nearly forgotten was picked back up and handed to her, and it went further than it ever would have if Raven's Edge had never happened further than a safe, predictable by-the-book career ever could have carried her. But that isn't the part of the story that lasted. The part that lasted came years later when Captain Emily Carter, older, now with more weight on her own shoulders, stood in front of rooms full of young pilots. And they looked at her the way she'd once looked at legends, and they asked her about Raven's Edge. They always asked about Raven's Edge, and they always expected the same story: the missiles and the gun runs and the impossible flight, the dust storm and the landing on fumes. They wanted the machine, the weapons, the danger. And Emily always gave them something else. You want to know about the aircraft, she'd say. You want to know how low I flew and how close I cut it and how I threaded a gun run between 11 men. And I'll tell you all of it because you should know it, because someday you might have to fly something like it yourselves. But before I tell you any of that, I need you to understand the only thing about that night that actually matters. Because if you learn the wrong lesson from Raven's Edge, then 11 men held on for nothing, and I'd rather never tell the story again than tell it wrong. And she would look out at all those young faces and she would tell them the truth. The aircraft didn't save those men. The weapons didn't save those men. I've flown better aircraft since, and I'll fly better ones still. What saved those men was that I decided in an office where I'd been grounded for 6 weeks and told I was a problem, that 11 lives I'd never seen were worth more than my career and my safety and my fear. That's it. That's the whole secret. The flying was just the part that came after the deciding. She'd pause, letting it land. Every one of you is going to be better with the machine than I ever was. The technology gets better every year, and you're all sharper than I was at your age. But the machine has never once been the thing. The greatest strength a pilot has isn't the aircraft you fly, or the weapons you carry, or even the skill in your hands. It's the people you refuse to abandon. It always was. It always will be. And the day you forget that, the day you start thinking the machine is what matters, is the day you should hang it up. Because you'll have lost the only thing that ever made any of it worth doing. The young pilots would go quiet. Then the way rooms go quiet when something true is said out loud, and Emily would let the quiet sit because she wanted them to carry it out of that room and into their own cockpits in their own worst nights. She never named the enemy commander in those talks. She never spent much time on him at all. The man who had built a perfect trap facing the wrong direction, who had laughed into a stolen radio and told 11 Americans to bleed slow, who had grown impatient and then desperate, and then at the very end thrown away all his cleverness for one last swing and lost. He wasn't the point. He'd built a machine of patience and geometry and blood, and it had been undone not by a better machine, but by a single human being who cared more than his machine had accounted for. That was the whole story if you stripped everything else away. He had planned for every aircraft in the American inventory. He had never once planned for a grounded pilot who refused to leave people behind. And that in the end was the thing Emily Carter understood, that the review boards and the comfortable rooms and even the enemy who built the trap had all failed to understand. You can build a wall against any aircraft. You can stack your missiles and dig in your guns and study the playbook page by page. You can plan for every machine your enemy owns. But there is no defense in the world that stops a person who has decided that someone else's life is worth more than their own fear. They tried to ground her, and she flew into the impossible and brought 11 men home. They called her reckless, and she was the most careful pilot who ever lived. They said no aircraft could survive that canyon, and they were right, because it was never the aircraft that survived it. It was the woman who refused to leave.